And some work over the years on maritime crime, so sea piracy, fisheries crime, investigating cases where endangered stocks of fish are taken illegally. And some of the key areas that we've worked on have looked at theft of abalone in particular, which is of course a delicacy in Japan, shark fin, and some complex policing operations that involve the Patagonian toothfish in the southern oceans. Now, turning to economic crime, this is really looking at the area of personal fraud, some of the consumer scams that are out there, identity fraud, the recent problem of credit card skimming, where people are fabricating data recording devices from ATMs to capture information, and then also having cameras to record your PIN, counterfeiting a card and then using that to withdraw money from your bank. Business fraud and intellectual property crime. This is getting into some more complicated areas of corporate fraud, problems of industrial espionage, theft of trade secrets, things like that, insider trading. The problem of intellectual property crime more specifically, where people are stealing information often online, but similarly just reproducing DVDs and selling them in street markets. Fraud against the government, so we've got tax fraud, welfare fraud, Medicare fraud, and all of the frauds that take place by government employees, public servants, who defraud their own organisations, which can extend from the trivial, such as travel allowance, scams, through to very widespread fraud where people in government departments set up false accounts and siphon off money out of the government. Things like this, this is a phishing scam where someone's pretending to be the tax office and asking people to click here to get their tax refund. This is, the sort of thing that's quite prevalent. The purpose, of course, is to get your personal information, banking information, and when you click here, you'll download malware, as Raymond has mentioned, which will enable the crooks to gain further personal information from you in the future. And finally, money laundering and financing of terrorism. This has become a very important public policy issue since about 1988 in Australia. What our research has entailed in this area is really looking at the typologies of money laundering, so how people are laundering funds, the sorts of manipulative ways in which they're disguising transactions to enable them to deal with the proceeds of crime. And then also looking at the consequences of having regulations in place. So if it's very difficult for people to commit money laundering easily, such as doing multiple bank transactions, then people are starting to move away from regulated sectors like banking and use other sectors. And one example of that is the non-profit sector, which Sam mentioned, people manipulating charities for money laundering purposes. Similarly, using alternative remittance systems, hawala dealers, people in ethnic communities that agree to transfer funds from Australia to overseas through agreements, informal agreements that don't make use of banks generally, or simply moving money around in currency or value, gold or precious metals. That is all pretty anonymous, and it's very hard for the government authorities to track what's going on. So we're investigating the extent to which those sort of activities are taking place and how to deal with them. Finally, we're also looking at the ways in which professionals can contribute to these problems. So accountants and lawyers, are they actually advising people how to do this sort of activity, and what are the best ways to put controls on those professionals to make it more difficult? Now, in terms of electronic crime, Raymond's mentioned some of the main areas that we're working in. I guess you can look at cybercrime as a progression over the years from the earliest periods when it developed. As new technologies have been created, they've all been manipulated for improper purposes. So just piecing together the new techniques that have emerged and seeing how to deal with them and not make matters worse is one of the main objectives in that sort of area. Now, future. There's an ever-burgeoning number of new sorts of crimes that are in this area, and we're looking at, the extent to which they're going to be problems in terms of the future, and also when they happen, how to respond to them. So looking at some of the global influences on crime, what's happening with migration patterns? Are they going to cause new crime problems for Australia? What effect did the global financial crisis have on crime? Did it make fraud more prevalent or less prevalent? What's global warming going to do? And also how are government policies that deal with that problem able to be manipulated by criminals? Is there new fraud opportunities in government programs? You will have seen in the newspapers some of the discussion about the government insulation program and the school building program. Both of those were manipulated by fraudsters. What should we and the government do to try and minimise risks in those new areas? And similarly in cybercrime, now we're all using mobile phones and iPads. What are the risks involved in that? And Raymond's just doing some work at the moment on cloud computing, where we're going to make use of external sources to house our data and applications. Is that going to make things a real problem for law enforcement and create new crime risks? Similarly, patterns of victimisation. If we look at consumer fraud, it's all very well to find out how much of a problem it is, but how do you stop it? And to understand that, you really need to know why people are responding to Nigerian scam letters. What are the personal factors in people's lives that make them want to respond to those sort of things? What are the fraud risks facing small businesses, particularly small businesses that keep their own computers up to date? How do you address those sort of things? And in terms of demographics, as the population's getting older, there's specific risks for older people. And we've just been asked to do some research for the government on crime risks facing older people. Lots of money now in superannuation funds, and that's created a very attractive target for fraudsters. Similarly, older people are using computers a lot more than they did in the past, and they can be defrauded. In terms of responses, there's a whole range of technological solutions that are being devised to deal with sophisticated crimes. Your credit card now has a chip on it, and you've got to put in a PIN when you withdraw funds. That's already starting to be manipulated by criminals. Biometric systems, such as when you go through the airport and have your face scanned to get into the country, there's ways of overcoming those technologies, although I have to say that Australia's system's extremely secure. Criminal justice sanctions, there's technologies to monitor offenders electronically with tags. Are they effective in dealing with offenders? And similarly, some courts have started using restriction on internet usage as a sanction for cybercrime offenders. And as I mentioned previously, there's restorative justice approaches to dealing with white-collar crime that can be investigated to see whether they're more effective than other ways of dealing with these sorts of offences.